framework to help people with big IQs and smaller IQs effectively navigate through a situation. Number 3, it provides a meeting place for ideas and even taboo ideas. When I talk to people in ideologically extreme positions, if I argue with them, we just get what resists persists. We just fight. We get stronger, muscular, if you like, in our debate. But if I say, let me understand your ideology, here is a counter ideology, or here's another ideology, or even within your ideology, pull out the bits that actually are good, that are useful, rather than just everything's bad and useless. So what I want to do is pull out those ideological positions that I think, actually within that, I can hear where you're coming from. I can see what you're saying. I can kind of get my hands around what you're trying to grapple with because it resonates. Now, how about if we situate that within this ideology? How does that work? And actually, I find that people are far more open and receptive, A, to thinking in a different way, but also, if we want to get all security and psychological about it, it actually is quite subversive because we're helping change the narrative. The fourth area is it provides a roadmap for policy making. So I would suggest that when it comes to education, when it comes to how we bring our children up, I think rather than just blanking what's going on, my children, my sons now have been through school, etc., and they were being confronted with the Andrew Tates of this world, etc. Now, you can argue, my one naughty word for the day, you can argue the toss with people like that, and I've sat with individuals who hold to those things, and you can argue point by point, you're going to lose. It's not going to work. But if we grab a hold of it and say, actually, I think I can see where you're coming from, and then policy will be to equip our educators and our education system with ways to train our children and our young people how to think through ideological lenses rather than just try to beat the other person through a sound argument and reasoning. And actually, rather than resist them, actually to pull out, that's an interesting point. Where do we situate that within these different ideological positions? The anthropologists Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson looked at how societies change and evolve. And they drew a simple pyramid, a simple triangle, as all good models, all good heuristics provide us shortcuts to navigate complexity. If we want to create change, sometimes we can approach it at the environmental level. Let's change the chairs around, physical level. We can approach it at the skills level or the training level. You need to understand this, you need to do that, etc. That's a very transactional approach to creating change in society. The fastest changes in society, according to them and the research across the world, is when you touch people at a belief or an ideological level. Because we are not just rational, logical beings, we are emotive, meaning-making human beings who need to find meaning, place, and purpose in life. So therefore, an ideology will trump an ideology. And Mead and Bateson and other people like that said, if you get to the top of the pyramid, which is around belief, purpose, and identity, and you start to converse around then, the cascading change when people start to grab a hold of those positions is faster than if you try to drive transactional change from the bottom up. So I would argue from a position of transformational language through ideology rather than transactional language through sheer raw argument in and of itself. It doesn't mean we shouldn't be logical, shouldn't mean we shouldn't argue and bring facts in, but we have to deal at the ideological level. Let me throw out a simple ideological thought, very small, and I'm going to finish on this. And it goes something like this. If we look at the world, there's enough for everybody's need, but not for everybody's greed. A simple ideological position, a simple paradigm which we can look at the world through. Now, we can then start to dive into the complexities, because how does that affect environment, need and greed? How does that affect financial institutions, need and greed? How does that affect business, need and greed? How does that affect the marginalized and the elites of society, need and greed? How does that affect foreign policy and aid, expansionism, need and greed? Simple, pithy things like that make sense instinctively at an ideological level and give us an opportunity to drop down and talk policy, talk taboo, have a framework and a moral compass at which to navigate complexity through. It's a massive challenge, but we can't ban it. We can't ban the stuff we see online. It's too late. It's got away. It's too democratized. We need to engage, get on the playing field, and actually start to think up ideological positions that inspire rather than seek to crush other people just for the sake of winning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will be opening up for questions, but I think we're going to start with an interpanel discussion. Yes. And I want to raise something which wasn't raised. Jonathan Hall, KC, who's the counter-terrorism sort of regulator, he said the internet is a major source of radicalization and self-radicalization of children. And one of the problems with the online safety bill, he feels, is that children are not being protected enough. So could I have some thoughts on that? And also, the head of the Met's counterterrorism unit, Commander Dominic Murphy, has said that the Met has seen an uncomfortable rise in child radicalization driven by online content. And one of the issues is, how do you protect children on the internet? We know that TikTok is huge, and when there are even age restrictions, that's not necessarily implemented. So that follows on your point, Paul, about education. And in Finland, they have a very effective, I think, educational policy on teaching children about recognizing misinformation, disinformation. So could we explore that a bit? How do you feel that government, could deal? Because and also in France, they've been witnessing a huge uptick in IS activity, recruiting in ISIS, recruiting a new generation of young people online. And so could we explore that a bit, please? Thank you.
Sure.
Who wants to? Yeah.
Yes, I've more technical thoughts around this kind of stuff, but I engage both with prevent and security around the Met side of things, as well as people on the ground. And I think one of the things that we can do, which is very, very practical, is from a social media perspective, rather than try to ban it and police and regulate, which I think that would be lovely, but I think we're beyond the stage where it's even possible with how you can get around things these days. That's just the way it is. I wonder whether we should start turning on the algorithms that actually search for facts. I think there's an algorithmic argument that says that a lot of the social media algorithms are sensational. They pick up on certain trends, etc., that are more sensational. Well, why don't we disrupt that by turning on and releasing algorithms and chatbots and machine learning and all the other bits and pieces that are actually fact finders, truth seekers, and do it that way. And the reason why I say that is because I can't mention names because we're streaming, but some people I was talking to some time ago work for the parent company of one of the well-known online social media platforms, and one of his roles, and he's involved with psychological warfare. He got employed by such an organization, allegedly. One of his roles was to develop the algorithms that would persuade people to move from one position to another, particularly when it came to the Brexit argument. And so I know it's indeed possible for us to begin to work with social media companies to develop algorithms that actually pull out facts and truth and wrap them into some sort of clever ideological position. It's just using the same methods that are used negatively, but use them positively.
Thank you, but so far a lot of the social media companies have been reticent. They're big business, and one of the problems is sensationalism, as we know, sells. Do you think, there's a big argument that the internet companies should be held to account by being held to account by the same standards that old media, the newspapers, that they should be treated as publishers. One of the big problems is that it's quite difficult at the moment with current the legislation just doesn't keep up. Could you?
There's a part of me that's quite pragmatic, and I would love to think that we could turn back the clock and make all those things happen. I don't know how you police it. I don't know how you regulate it effectively and efficiently for a long enough period of time. It would be fantastic. It would be fantastic. But so I'm much more of the, well, why don't we use the influence subversion approach? Subversion, I don't know if that's the right word, but the influence approach, and somehow hook it to the bottom line of media companies as well, or advertisers, and make truth sensational, make accuracy sensational, exciting in some sort of more positive narrative.
But it's a carrot and a stick approach that, you know, if they're held to account as publishers, some people feel that would improve, you know, standards. Because at the moment it seems, and obviously because these are cross-border international companies, that's obviously another hurdle that, you know, who, where, what regulates.
I mean, my sense is that, I mean, I'm not an expert on policy and law in that respect, but I would think it's nearly impossible to legislate unless the state steps in and starts turning things off and clamping down. And unfortunately, well, from my perspective at least, I think that these companies and how shares work and how the stock exchange works and transnational business operates, I just don't think advanced Western democracies can operate in that way. Maybe it's a bit sad.
Yeah, I was going to say a little bit pessimistic.
Sorry.
William, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think trying to control the internet companies is fine, but it's been done, it's being done, it's part of the process, and it's failing. The children, the whole of society is subverting children, not just the internet. You look at mainstream television. I mean, what's the big problem with children? And that is violence, knife crime, anger, aggression, brutality that is creeping into their lives. And it's creeping into their lives from mainstream media, from the BBC and the ITV, which put on programs which are, frankly, very, very brutal now. And very, very brutal. And people become inured to violence, desensitized. It's, in my view, this is my view, I'm just saying. And so what we need is a kind of sea change in society. And we also need, if you want an old-fashioned view, we've taken away all of the things that children did, not just in Britain, but across the world, because of this change in approach from governments. And our own government here in the UK, the youth clubs have gone, the swimming pools are being closed down, the kinds of things that would occupy children and get them off the streets. And you see a huge rise in knife crime, you see a huge rise in violent crime. And I think it's a problem that we are not addressing properly. And there is alienation. These people, these kids don't feel they belong to anything. They haven't got a club to belong to. They haven't got an ideology to belong to. And what are the great ideologies? They are socialism, ISIS, moral rearmament, pacifism like Martin Luther King, active pacifism. You know, you have all these kind of gripping thoughts. Well, what is ISIS? It's grasped a lot of young people and caused them to go and fight in Syria. Not, I mean, it's a thing of the past, but it may be a thing of tomorrow too, especially with what's going on in Gaza now when people are being radicalized by that. What is ISIS? ISIS is an ideology that believes in Armageddon and exclusivity. It believes that you're with us or you're against us, and these are the final days.
But how do we protect children?
How do you protect children from an ideology like this? Is by promoting inclusivity and promoting an ideology, basically, of, you all belong, you are part of our society, and inclusivity is enormously important, rather than the exclusive ideology that is being thrust down the internet, whether you're talking about the extreme right, who hate anybody who aren't the same as them, or ISIS, who hate everybody who aren't the same as them. You need to fight this kind of extremism with inclusivity and with an ideology of love. I'm sorry, it sounds terribly old-fashioned, but it is, I think, the only way. And it has to be done, and it has to be done as an alternative, instead of merely trying to suppress extremism. You will never win a battle where you just try and suppress extremism.
So, thank you, William. I'd like to now open it up to questions from the audience. If you could introduce yourself and say where you're from, that would be great. Do you need...
Yeah, there's one coming from the back.
Okay.
There we go.
Thank you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it on? All right. Thank you very much for the talk. I'm going to kind of combine both talks in my question. My name is Tyler West, and I'm doing a PhD in Ireland, almost finished. I'm looking at user agency in media regulation, social media regulation, actually. So this is quite pertinent. But I'm from Appalachia. And I'm from, I don't think my community is necessarily unique in this regards. I've seen so many people become maybe a soft version of radicalization, but also conspiratorial thinking, and it's really disheartening, to be honest. And so your talks resonated with me on that level. One of my questions was for when we're talking about ideology and meeting an ideology with another ideology, how do you do that in a way? First of all, what does that alternative ideology look like? I'm assuming it isn't necessarily a progressive ideology, because that would be absolutely blocked from the get-go. What does that look like, and how do we keep that from being paternalistic? Because in some ways, you're coming in and you're saying, well, I'm taking what you're saying on board, but here I'm going to change it, so how do you make that work? Because in my experience, when anybody, I personally know, I try to challenge their ideologies or even act like I'm commiserating in some way with their beliefs, they're like, I'm on to you. You're trying to change my mind. So that was one question. The other, really for both of you, was what is the cause of all this? We talk about the anger and the anti-elite. Nobody really talked about what they thought the root cause was. And I think until we get to the root causes and fix those, this problem is going to continue.
William touched on it, thank you. So if you could keep the answers brief. Yeah, thank you. Who wants to go first? Paul, do you want to go first?
Tyler, thank you. Yes, I've spent many, many hours, weeks, months, it feels like years in rooms talking to people with really strong ideologies. And in the early stages, I was a bit of a trickster. I was thinking, hey, yeah, how can I make you think that I agree, and then I can subvert because I've got some clever Socratic questioning technique. It doesn't work. Actually, the truth of the matter is this takes time. And actually going in with 2 ears and 1 mouth, using them in those proportions, and genuinely listening for, actually, I can see where you're coming from, actually. Tell me more, tell me more. And it's time and proximity that win people, not the argument. The arguments come later. Of course, we can take people on a logical thing, but actually it takes time to walk with people through a process. How have I changed over time? I've had epiphany moments, but it's been over time. Whether I like it or not, that's just how we change. Brains like the shortest possible route. They don't like burning carbohydrates, so they need time to change. In terms of the causal factors, really interesting. Whether I talk to Kremlin whistleblower, through to paedophile hunter, the common thing that comes through is a sense of existential nothingness. They call it black pilling. What's the point? Red pilling is, hey, we've woken up to see the world as it really is. But black pill is, I've woken up to see the world as it really is, but there's just no point. And I think people are in an existential vacuum. And I think that's a big, because we won't get into geopolitical, the collapsing of familiar things around us creates, and I'm going to try and keep it pithy, so I'm going to stop, but I think there's a lot to unpack in the existential vacuum. And of course, you get strong women and men stepping into that and providing simple solutions to complex answers. And people want security and stability, so they'll latch onto it and find meaning, something to live for, but more importantly, something to die for. And I think we've kind of lost a lot of that something to die for business.
Thank you. William?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, the problem you have is that people don't have a sense of belonging enough. The old nationalisms have gone, and they are replaced by a very parochial kind of attitude where you dislike the other, and that's it. I'd never liked nationalism. I'm an internationalist. I believe in a multicultural world, but it's not. There is a lack of a sense of belonging, and I think that is a core problem with the alienated. People don't feel they belong, and then hatred gets fostered. And and hatred, we live in a much more hating world now. Hatred is much more of a feature of our lives. Hatred of Israel, hatred of Russia. You get a lot of hatred bouncing around amongst ordinary people. And it is a real problem that this is becoming a phenomena in our society, in my view. Hatred of migrants, hatred of... The hatred is becoming a major phenomena. Hatred of Brexiteers by Remainers and vice versa. So it's something we have to deal with. But the other thing is ideologies for inclusivity. I mean, we've experimented with this at my foundation, the one I work with, in different ways. And one time, a few years back, we set up an online group called Qawata. Qawata is Arabic for reflections. And we decided we'd make it a kind of Sufi-esque program, and we built it on the basis of an organization Paul knows called Moral Rearmament, which believes in, or used to believe in, doesn't exist now really, but used to believe in absolute purity, absolute truth, absolute love, and absolute selflessness. Now, it was an odd thing to build an ideological page on. We did it as an experiment. We made it totally inclusive, so pro-gay, pro-everybody, you know, a one-world ideology of the kind of thing that Khalil Gibran used to believe in, a world without frontiers, where you're all part of the one brotherhood and the sisterhood of mankind. And we promoted it on Facebook. It's still there. It's a pretty dead page now because we haven't had the energy, because it took huge effort putting things up in Arabic and English every day. It got up to around 500,000 followers, and mostly in towns like Cairo. And it's interesting, though, that people are eager for a philosophy of inclusivity in a world where there is so much exclusivity of the other. And so that was an experiment.
Okay.
But there are other approaches. Sorry, Debbie's accusing me of talking on too much. But I think we really need to try and look at this whole issue of extremism in a different way.
Are there more questions? Veronica, thank you.
Maybe some online as well.
Yeah.
I have no suggestion. I'm working for the Next Century Foundation. Sorry, I've got a frog in my throat. I just believe that if you discuss things the whole emphasis is sorry, you don't get together and discuss things. I think if we can actually have a situation where people can talk and discuss things, and they suddenly find it that person is quite like themselves, and they don't put up a wall because well, you're all Muslim and I'm Christian, and you ought to be able to discuss things. And I just think it's so sad that people no longer just have the opportunity to discuss things, and always there's this great umbrella of the internet sort of covers everybody, and so you don't meet people and discuss things. I mean, the thing is to meet people and talk about things. I think it's really important to be able to do that. And now in this internet world, we don't discuss people and find out that person's quite like ourselves and put up walls. And I just find it really, really sad that we've got to this where we don't actually meet people and talk to them. I think that's much better. I'm sorry, I have no other solution. That's what I was going to say.
Are there any online questions, Gwen? Okay. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My name is Joe. I'm from Hong Kong, China. I'm the chief editor of Artificial Intelligence Global Community. So I like this topic very much. So my question is, should we consider the historical perspective when we discuss extremism? 50 years ago, LGBTQ was not a good thing, 50 years ago. But today, it has become common sense. 200 years ago, colonialism was a social progress, but today it's a bad thing. So today we discuss about how to protect children, how to educate them. But actually, I think children themselves is educated themselves by TikTok. When we discuss about TikTok spread bad ideas, but it also share lots of knowledge to next generation. We could imagine that 100 years ago, probably BBC TV is an evil thing. It's not good. As same as we treat TikTok today. So I want to know, could we probably after 100 years, everything narrative will be changed. And today's extremism will become another thing.
Wow.
Okay.
It's quite a question. The one thing I would say about the BBC, there are regulations about impartiality. I mean, they're regulated. TikTok is not regulated. There are responsibilities for public broadcasters, certainly in the UK, and that's regulated by Ofcom. So I don't think you can sort of compare apples and pears. That's the only thing I would just like to point out. So, Paul, would you like to tackle, I mean, wow, extremism, is it going to become in 100 years?
The norm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Quite
think,
a question. Thank you.
so stepping back, yes, of course, ideas, norms, values do seem to change over time, over history. You know, we convince ourselves that certain things were true and horrible or true and right 100 years ago, which then turn out to be the opposite or close to. So therefore, what's the solution? Is the solution to fight those things, or is the solution to actually deal with rules of engagement? So let me unpack that just a little bit. When I'm talking to people with different positions, and my position's changed over times as well, but when I talk to people with different positions, I'm not looking to beat them. We set up rules of engagement. And rules of engagement help us navigate in our conversation how we're going to discuss that. So we're going to be respectful. Yes. What does that mean? We have to define that. Are we going to be loving? Yes. Sounds fluffy. But ideas have legs. These emotions have legs. If I'm angry and I don't settle, that has legs in terms of I'm going to act out of that. So if we're discussing an ideological position which we may disagree on, or which may well change in 50 years' time, I think it's really good to train people how to actually engage with other people in conversation, because we need to have a humbler position. I'm not saying that certain extremist positions we take all the way through forever, but if I'm not a philosopher, but if you read Hegel, when he talks about antithesis, and then, when he talks about synthesis, bringing ideas together, I think it's a much better way to approach these ideas, which may well change. We have a humbler position. We're not rolling over. We're trying to pull out what is genuinely useful, understand that we all change. But I think there are some red lines. I think there has to be some red lines around the dignity of a human person and a human being. The old-fashioned things about love. All those things actually have stood the test of time as ideologies and extreme positions have come and gone. They seem to be the themes that cut across. So I wonder if we focus on the universal themes that cut across our shared humanity and build from that place. Might be a bit of a pie-in-the-sky thought, but I can't think of anything better.
William.
Well, there's so much to say. I think Veronica, by the way, was quite right about the issue of talking to one another. That is essential, and it can be done. Too often, social media is a place where you put your own view and then walk away, and then you get your followers. But there's not a proper conversation in every instance, and we need to make social media a place for conversations. So that when people post something, you respond rather than just take it down. That's one of the things. By the way, I talked about Coata. We promoted that, we're talking 5-10 years ago. Now, and that was on Facebook. Now the big, with the young people, we should be on TikTok or Snapchat or whatever. These are the big programs. Facebook is... Well, it's not dead in the Middle East, but it's pretty dead here in the West. And TikTok is where it's at. And TikTok is what young people look at. And so that's the platform that needs looking at. And I don't think our chair is right. I don't think the BBC is regulated, in my view. The amount of extreme graphic violence on the BBC that promotes extreme violence is not regulated, and I don't think the BBC is balanced. I don't think their coverage... We're here on Holocaust Memorial Day today, and we're asked to put a candle in our windows to remember the dead from extremism. But it's very hard at a time when people are dying in Gaza. It's very hard. It's very hard to adopt these conventional sort of positions. I think that Debbie's pointing out the time. I will stop. But I think your question is very powerful, very important, and in a historical context. You're right. The old ideologies, we've moved on. It's not a world in which communism in its traditional Marxist-Leninist sort of idea... Well, it died pretty swiftly, traditional communism, as an ideology. I'm not sure you got it under Stalin anymore. It ended pretty swiftly. But there are... These ideologies are gripping, you know, the ownership of the means of production by the people, for the people, Clause 4 of the Labour Party. Ideologies grab people, whether it's ISIS, communism, whatever, and we need to be aware of that. And you don't fight an ideology by trying to repress it. But the historical context, yes, it does matter.
I need to repeat, the BBC has very strict guidelines and regulation, and that's a whole other discussion. But I think on impartiality, we need to wrap up. I'm going to...
Oh, we're all right. Are we all right? Do we need to wrap up?
Yeah.
My goodness, I was looking at the clock up there.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just going to say that I think, as you've seen, the chair disagrees with some of the speakers, but we need to continue this conversation. We could go on and on. I think this is a subject we will revisit. And I think the big takeaway for me is that obviously education is key, and that governments, I think politicians also, we haven't touched upon this, their language of division and hate also sets a tone.
It does, that's true.
And so I'm sure the speakers will be happy to speak to you afterwards if anyone has any further questions. So I'm going to wrap this discussion up, and thank you very much for coming today. Thanks.
Thank you.